an Unspoiled Network podcast.
This is Spoil Me, covering The Rogue, chapters 15, 16, and 17. Uninvited Company, Fears and Concerns, and Mind Games. In these chapters, Lilia is getting played again. You hate to see it. Also, Lorkin is very nearly murdered. But in the end, things work out pretty fucking well for him. Welcome to Spoil Me. Welcome to the show, everyone. I am Natasha. Thank you very much to Ashley for commissioning this episode. Ashley messaged me a little bit earlier and said that she would be unable to make it, which is a shame because these are some pretty intriguing chapters, man. I am all in on this book. The last book was tough, and I don't really know why they felt that needed to be its own thing. This book has a lot more going for it, and it's just gripped me in a much different way. So, let's start with Chapter 15, Uninvited Company. This can mean so many things. I believe in this sense what we're meant to be thinking of is really the tie-end is coming along for this trip. And Daniel, I really enjoy how Daniel starts to be like, oh shit, maybe Achadi wants Tyen to be here. It hadn't occurred to him, and I have to be honest, it hadn't occurred to me either. Maybe Achadi's like, well, I asked Daniel if he wanted to fuck a while back. He still never got back to me. Tyen, on the other hand, really seems DTF, so maybe I'll bring him along instead, and that'll be way better. You know, I kind of would understand if that's where his mind was going. It also turns out that the slave that he had been hooking up with is not in his employment anymore. And I don't know if I missed exactly what happened there. I feel like I must have, because this slave's being employed by Achadi's cousin turns out to be quite a surprise. And I feel like I must have missed something. But you know, it's possible that ever since he stopped working for Achadi hasn't gotten laid, which would really fucking suck. So maybe he's just feeling a little bit fucking anxious and is like, I may as well double up my chances of getting laid by bringing both of them and then just sort of letting them figure it out, you know? And the trip there, I had forgotten that Tyen gets really, really seasick. I feel for him. I really do. There is nothing worse than that kind of reaction being unavoidable and knowing that you're going to be spending a bunch of time in that situation. I hate it, man. Also, I should mention, it's always interesting to me when the author points out the differences in the way that magic is used in Sachaka versus Kirelia. Because the Sachakans choose not to use magic for tasks. Magic is sort of seen as above that, and the fact that they have slaves means that they feel no need to help. Whereas in Kirelia, if magic will assist with something getting done, and you have a bunch of servants who appear to be sort of struggling with the thing, it's just sort of manners to assist with that using magic. And what's interesting in this scene, because Daniel is watching these slaves getting all of the luggage off of the cart and getting it loaded onto this ship. And Daniel is thinking about the fact that here in Sachaka, that is not something that they use magic for. Whereas in Kirelia, that would be immediately what everybody would do is reach for magic to help to levitate things. But then he notices that Achadi is keeping an eye on the slaves that are doing the lifting, and he notices that the slaves are all pretty scrawny, but they're able to lift these extremely heavy trunks and boxes anyway. And he's sort of thinking to himself, oh shit, I think that he might actually be helping them, even though that's kind of not socially what he is supposed to do. And I think that's interesting. I can't help but still be suspicious of Achadi. So whenever Daniel notices him being like somewhat decent, I sort of wonder if it's not a purposeful like manipulation on his part. And I can't shake that feeling. I guess what it is I don't feel like I have gotten to know Achadi well enough to sense what his agenda is, if he has one. Part of me, because of the fact that he's gay, wants to believe that he's more liberal-minded in general, but that's not necessarily true, you know? And doing something like this, I want to be like, well, maybe he's just trying to be kind and helpful because he recognizes that slaves are human beings. But on the other hand, if you do feel that way, if you see slaves as full people, then you would not fucking live in Sachaka. You would get the hell out of there because you wouldn't be able to handle living like this, I would think. So, I don't know. I go back and forth on what I feel about him. So, next to him is Maria, who is getting very cranky as she's watching them load up. It was bad enough when Daniel was going by himself, but once she found out that Tyend was also going, she really gets in a mood about it, which I understand. And at one point, Tyend is standing next to Daniel, and Daniel's sort of thinking over Tyend's excuse to come and what Tyend's motives here. Daniel sort of seems to think that Tyend is cock blocking him as well, but then he sort of sets that aside. Like, oh, I'm sure that's not what it is. I don't really know why he does it. Because he says, why would he do that? Jealousy? No. Tyend was the one to point out that he and I are no longer a couple. He never said he wanted to change that. Honestly, Daniel, are you that fucking dense? You know what? Yes, he is. I know he is. Jesus, he really is. Of course it's jealousy. Like, granted, I'm sure there's also the thrill of the adventure. I mean, you did say yourself that when you guys were traveling together and doing research while on adventures, that seemed to be when he was enjoying himself the most. So I'm certain that that's also a factor. But the idea that he's like, well, he's the one who said we're not together anymore, so he can't possibly be jealous. Honey, that's not how that shit works. Okay? Are you kidding me? Like, I left my husband for another man, but I won't lie to you guys. When I saw that he had a girlfriend and then went and got married like less than a year out from when we divorced, I definitely had a twinge of like, what the fuck? I had no leg to stand on. I had no reason to even feel like I had the right to make that sort of judgment call or feel that way. I still felt that way. That's just how emotions work. You just have a reaction and you have a feeling about a thing and it doesn't have anything to do with logic, you know? So, yeah, the idea that like, oh, of course Tyend is. Daniel, get back to fucking planet Earth with the rest of us, okay, dude? So this is, oh, right, okay, so I didn't miss it. I forgot that Daniel's thinking to himself that Varn has disappeared. And he doesn't know what happened to him, and then they wind up finding out. So they get onto the ship, and the captain tells them that, I think that he says that it shouldn't be too long before they get there. I think it was shorter than I expected. And as soon as they are on the water, Daniel can see that Tyend is like gotten pale and is already not feeling super well. And there's kind of an awkward silence initially. And finally, Achadi is sort of compelled to make small talk and be a bit of a tour guide. See that building? That's one of the few mansions over 200 years old not built in the Sachakan style. It was built by Dana let out a silent sigh of relief. Thank you, it's shoddy. Though I think you've just condemned yourself to filling in silences with facts and history for the rest of the trip. At least it's a solution to days of awkward silence. So then we go to Lilia. I'm going to talk about Lilia's whole deal here, just out of the gate. Lilia is a compelling character to me. And that's a tricky thing because a lot of times when I feel like a character is not super intelligent, I get really frustrated with them and I do not like them. I just find them kind of irritating in how dense they seem to be. But Lilia is a really nicely constructed combination of naive and rationally intelligent in certain ways. So it's not like she's completely dense, but she does think the best of people and takes people at their word in a way that clearly she has not yet learned isn't safe. And so she feels very believable to me. And also it's interesting that she has apparently a bit of I'm not really sure what I want to call it. I guess like a gift for sensing magic, like being able to do something, magically speaking, that has only been barely explained to her versus having to be shown how to do it, which is something that evidently isn't super common, which is why the guild all were very certain that you couldn't learn black magic by reading a book about it. And we wind up seeing a little bit later exactly how that falls out. And it's extremely interesting to me that she can just break on past that. I have a lot of questions about it. But the first thing that we have is her sitting alone thinking about Naki. And I really had thought when she says that she had so much time to sit and think, and she'd been thinking about Naki, and she was wondering, and I thought it was going to be like, she was wondering if maybe she'd been played and Naki actually didn't care about her and what was going on with her. But no, it's still, she was wondering if anybody had caught Naki's father's murderer because Naki deserved to know the truth. Naki deserved better than that. And maybe she would stop hating her if she knew that she wasn't the one responsible. This poor girl is still laboring under this delusion about Naki's situation, and it's so hard to read. And she gets interrupted with this reverie by a guard showing up who we saw last section, and he had offered to bring her some books. And she brings them, he brings them. It turns out they're from the guards library, and they're not super exciting books. I'm going to read the titles here. Battles of the Vin Fleet Before the Alliance, and Strategies for Effective Control of Crowds During Processions and Events. Which, this is the sort of thing that sounds incredibly foolish, like for him to bring to her, thinking that she would be at all interested. But I have a suspicion that maybe she is going to come across some pretty helpful information in these books. I don't know. We'll see. And the guard's name is Waylor. And he tells her this is all he could get his hands on until he has a day off. And he says, if you like those, I can get more. Or maybe my wife likes those romantic adventures. I don't know if they're to your taste, but I'm sure she'd let you borrow them. And when he said this, I love what happens a little bit later because LaRondra is sort of talking to Lilia later and is like, bitch, don't fall for it. And honestly, I had the exact same reaction as LaRondra. When he mentions his wife, my immediate reaction was, oh, good, he's married and he's making sure to say he's married. Now I know that he isn't interested in her and he's not going to try anything. The next instant after I had that thought, I was like, or he's just trying to lull her into a sense of security and make her let her guard down and feel comfortable around him so that he can just try and like exploit her later, which is certainly possible. Because that is certainly a tactic. It seems counterintuitive to a lot of people that saying that you have a significant other would help you get closer to a person that you're interested in, but it definitely works. So this is just, I felt really weird about the fact that LaRondra's out here being the sort of cynical voice on the other side of the wall. And I was like 100% on the same page with her. So Lilia sits down to start reading these books and eat her dinner. And there is a couple of taps on the wall. And then Lorandra says, don't be fooled by what he says about the wife. He likes you. Maybe, and Lilia's like, what, you think he's lying? And she says, maybe he doesn't have a wife, or maybe he's telling you about her to make you trust him. But make sure that you don't get the wrong idea about doing favors. If he starts telling you how lonely he is, don't be surprised if he wants something in return. And she says, why are you telling me this? And Lorandra says, just trying to help. You're young. You've never been a prisoner before. You want to feel safe, but you shouldn't let that desire blind you to the dangers of your situation. And that is absolutely true. This is something I was just talking about. I'm also covering Veronica Mars, and I was just talking about a teacher that she is talking with at one point, and it is not confirmed or denied whether or not this teacher is sort of like interested in her, even though he's way too old for her. But it made me think of some situations when I was younger where I thought that a male authority figure was looking out for me and was just interested in helping me to succeed, noticed that I had talent, was genuinely trying to assist me in, reaching goals. And I look back and I realize, no, that dude definitely wanted to fuck me. Like, maybe he wasn't setting me up to fuck me. Maybe he wasn't actually actively attempting to do that. But he was certainly interested in helping me because of how I looked. And he was not going to be averse if things turned in that direction and I sort of began to seem interested. And it's a really weird thing as you get older when you go look back and recontextualize moments in your life where you really thought you knew what was going on at the time. And now you see so clearly that it was not that at all. And people that you kind of thought were on your side, you realized had very selfish motives that were extremely specific and you had no idea. And Lorandra might sound like a cynic here, but when you are a woman, this is just part of the world that you have to live in, unfortunately, is constantly watching out for predatory men or just kind of sad, pathetic men who aren't even actual predators, but are just interested in being around a pretty girl. And they don't actually care about the pretty girl outside of the fact that she is something to look at and make them feel good. So this conversation, it's too bad the turn that it takes because Lorandra's clearly manipulating her. But I kind of appreciated initially the sort of motherly warning of a seasoned, older woman who has seen this shit before and knows the fucking games that guys play. So this is when Lorandra starts to ask her why she's here, why she tried to learn black magic, whether they bound her powers, yada, yada, yada. And Lilia gives her the entire story, which is, I think, why Lorandra begins to play her a little bit later. I think Lorandra knows quite well from Lilia's account what the fuck actually happened. And she just figures that, oh, well, it worked for that girl and it wasn't even that hard. All I need to do is be her sole friend in a place that is filled with people she doesn't really connect with or trust. And that will be enough because she clings to friendships like that. Whether they're romantic or not, I think that was the angle that Naki played, but I don't think that it has to be. So I'm going to come back because I want to directly quote some portions of her story, but we're going to go to Lorkin now. Lorkin's deal is he gets really, really exhausted because Kalia is keeping him up really late, purposefully, he thinks, in retribution for the fact that he healed that girl. And as he is heading over to the room to sleep, he gets waylaid again to heal a young man. And he thinks that part of, like, Kalia is punishing him by keeping him awake, but also trying to keep him from going to see this other young man. And he heals the young man, but it takes so much out of him since he hasn't gotten to rest properly that he has practically no magic left by the time he's like heading back to his rooms. He's so exhausted that it's almost like he's drunk, like he can't stand up quite straight. So he's turning the corner, and then all of a sudden somebody jumps him and puts a sack over his head. And they pull the sack up at one point, and he's like really relieved and starts to breathe really deeply. And then they smash some, basically the equivalent of chloroform over his face. And he passes out and wakes up exhausted and with this like pounding headache. And the reason that he has this headache, it turns out, is because they are constantly draining him of energy to make sure that he doesn't get his magic up enough to fight back. And that to me is just so gross. And I appreciate how he mentions how violated he feels, and that this is just so like repulsive to him. And he's laying there, not even like really sure where he is. I kind of think that he doesn't even I think that he still has like something tied over his eyes so that he can't see. But he's thinking about what Kalia is doing here. And he's sort of like, I mean, if they kill me, they'll get in trouble because there's a punishment for killing traitors. And my immediate response was like, dude, you're not a traitor. One of the queens just like said that to you the other day. You really need to hear what people say. You aren't one of them. They know that. Like, that's not going to happen. They're not going to be punished the same way. And then he's like, and one of them might be willing to sacrifice themselves in order to get rid of me. But what it turns out Kalia is doing is she's setting it up that it looks like he just left. Like he just went off. And he says nobody's going to believe that. And she's like, oh, no, they definitely won't believe that. But they will have absolutely no proof that anything other than that happened. So they won't be able to do jack shit about it. And frankly, that is the kind of shit that it takes a very special kind of person to be cool with doing. I am somebody who my reputation and what people think of me means a fair amount to me. I want people to know the truth about how I feel. I want people to see the reality of why I'm doing what I do. I want the truth out there about who I am as a person. And if that gets damaged, if it's something that I legitimately did, I will fess up to that and be honest about the fact that I did not behave well, and that's on me, and I pay the penalty for that. But I wouldn't be able to stand doing things this way, which is I'm going to do a thing that I know is despicable. I'm aware it's despicable, even though I'm fine with it. I know how other people will see it. I know everybody will know that I did this despicable thing. Everybody's going to be completely aware of what the fuck happened. But nobody's going to be able to prove anything. So they can just talk all they want. Doesn't matter. They can't do shit to me. That's not something that I could be okay with, is knowing everybody's out there talking smack. And just because they can't, in a technical sense, carry out a punishment, I wouldn't feel free. I would be like waiting for the hammer to fall the whole time, assuming, well, everybody knows, and maybe I think I covered my tracks really well and they can't prove anything. But they might find something, or, as we have seen in this community, they will find a pretext for punishing me based on some other thing, when really I know I'm being punished for the first thing. So, it's interesting to me that Kalia is so confident that whether or not they can prove a thing, it's not really going to interfere with her overall plans at all. And I wonder how right she is about that, because, like, in the sense of they won't be able to do anything, probably not, right? But I do wonder if this would cost her the support of some people. It's hard to say, because I already said last section when Tyvara is like, oh, she might let a little girl die. She might do that shit. You know what? I kind of wouldn't put it past her. That reputation seemed to already be out there, and she still had people's support. So it's hard for me to say whether or not doing something this blatant would help or harm her. It seems like the kind of thing that I would think would harm her. But based on what's happened in our own country, the United States, in the last 4 years, I also obviously don't have a great grasp on where most people draw the line for respectable behavior in a leader. So maybe they would be all about it and they would fully support this sort of thing. I don't know. I really don't feel confident in either direction here. And Lorkin kind of doesn't either. And even if he felt any particular way about it, what's happening is what's going to happen. In the end, what she does is she decides to rifle through his mind using mind reading in order to get the secrets of how to heal using magic from his brain. Now, this is so gross. And I've said this before. Forcible mind reading is just, the word violation doesn't even come close. I can't imagine how awful this would be. And the fact that she is at her leisure to do it several times, and she wants information on how to heal, but eventually she just starts going into his memories to find out things about him, to fuck with him, and to gloat gleefully over things that he went through as a kid and traumas that he endured. And I swear to God, you guys, this fucked me up. I didn't even think of the idea of trying to force the secrets of how to heal from his mind had honestly not occurred to me. But even if they had, I don't think that this kind of just doing it for the fun of it would ever have entered my head. This is just so beyond the pale. I'm trying to find out, let's see. I'm trying to find the spot because she comes back at one point in order to, as she puts it, get more information in order to ensure that she doesn't do any harm with trying this healing magic. And that's what she claims. It seems like that is true, and she gets interrupted. But that, I want to read this section, but I'm trying to find it here. Let's see. Kalia's people, blah, blah, blah. He jerked reflexively. Here it is. Oh, right. They'll have to accept it since there won't be any witnesses. So here it is. She ignored them, too eager to learn what she knew. Only when her curiosity was satisfied did her intentions stray. And when it did, she prompted his mind for memories and facts he would not want her to see. The mind was a traitor and did not need much prompting, which is an interesting choice of words. Normally, he would have been able to put those memories behind imagined doors in his mind safely out of sight. Normally, the magician who stepped inside his mind would politely ignore those doors, but not Kalia. She chased after memories of his childhood in the guild, amused as she saw how he had been mocked over his mother's low origins and unmarried state, gleeful at learning how he'd had his heart broken by his first love, Beria, derisive of expectations that he would do something as heroic as his father, and contemptuous of his attraction to Tyvara. The idea of, we all have memories that are so embarrassing that even now, years later, decades later, you think of that moment in your life and you still wince, either in embarrassment or shame or whatever. And the one sort of comfort in those moments is the knowledge that more than likely, not another soul on the face of earth remembers the moment that is making you wince. It's probably only important to you and only something that you think of because it was you who was embarrassed and nobody else even remembers. But the idea that that moment can be like basically projected onto a big screen for somebody else to watch, and not in the kind of way that a friend would, where they're like, oh God, buddy, I'm sorry, that is rough. But to genuinely laugh at you and mock you and be derisive about it, I hate it so, so much. So the next time that she comes back, she kind of does the whole, I need more information and make sure that I have everything that I need. He sensed that she was in a hurry. She probed his memories hastily, grasping those of healing as soon as they rose. Then she seemed to force herself to take more time, examining what she had learned the day before. He knew that she could see that the application of the knowledge had to be shaped and refined according to the illness or condition, but she didn't have time to draw the details out of him. She would have to learn the rest by trial and error. Right now, she only wanted to know how best to avoid doing harm. So somebody erupts, and it turns out that her absence has been noted, and somebody has also noticed that Lorkin isn't around, and they have tracked them here. The sound of the door opening reached him, and someone drew in a breath of shock. "Get off him!" "No, Tyvara," another voice commanded. "Tyvara!" Lorkin's heart leapt. The force holding him down vanished. He struggled up into a seated position and tried rubbing the blindfold off against the rough wall behind him. Suddenly there were fingers roaming over his face again, only this time they were warm. And it's Tyvara. She has saved him. It's pretty great. He felt a little part of his mind freed from a constraint he'd been barely aware of. Looking down at the bindings, he saw a pale yellow gemstone among a pile of bandages. And he's offended by the fact that they used bandages to restrain him, which he's just like, that is beyond the pale. This is shit meant for healing, and I just hate you guys so much for using this way. But also, the stone he suspects kept him from being able to call out mentally. Because otherwise, magicians like mind-to-mind communication is something that he could have used to save himself. But that's only a theory. I'm assuming that that's correct. But I think it's interesting. So one of the speakers is Halana and the other is Savara, who are in the room. Savara asks, "Did you learn how to heal with magic from him?" Kalia says, "I might have." And he confirms that indeed she did. Savara says, "You've broken our law. You'll be judged." And Kalia says, "Of course, let's get on with it then." I am dying to know how they're going to handle this, because it could just go so many different ways. And I'm hoping the fact that he has been waylaid and helped heal a couple people like himself already will work in his favor. But I don't know, Meanwhile, Tyvara is looking over at Lorkin, and he's like, What's the problem? And she just grabs his face and kisses him. And he's like, oh, shit. Okay. And it's so funny how when I cover stuff for the show, they go into, they'll be in patterns where a lot of things I cover will all reach a season finale in the same week, or they'll all have an arc with a certain type of story the same week. And today I had another person who almost lost their opportunity to be with someone, suddenly realized that they were fucking shooting themselves in the foot and decide to pursue the relationship when earlier they had just been on the fence about it. And I like this moment. He asks her, "What made you change your mind about me?" And she says, "Oh, I didn't change my mind. I just changed my mind about what to do about you." And that is some relatable content right there. She knew how she felt the whole time, but she just didn't know how to fucking handle that. And that is a genuine problem sometimes. So let's see, where shall I go next? I feel like that's all of Lorkin. Yeah, that's everything dealing with Lorkin. Let's go back to Sania. So Sania is riding with Rothan to go and visit his son Dorian. Kids, I am so mad at Dorian. I am so mad at him. Dorian told his wife about Sari and Sari's daughter. Can somebody explain to me what the fuck this guy is thinking? Are you serious? Why would you do that, dude? Like, this is not even... it's one thing to be like, you don't have a lot of experience in subterfuge and you haven't done missions before and yada, yada, yada. It's one thing to like make some mistakes about the way you handle certain things. But then there's just common fucking sense, and sharing the fact that this dude is working with his child and is super like concerned about her safety and that she's like a weakness for him with family who apparently aren't super friendly to Sonia and kind of probably gossip. And I don't know that they have any good sense, because I feel like if they did, they wouldn't have even let it pass on to Sonia that they knew about Sari's daughter. I just honestly, I don't understand what the fuck Dorian is doing here, man. Like, it makes me not want him involved with anything further. And I wish that we got a scene with Sonia and him where she yells at him, because that is a huge piece of information that he's let fly. Like, that is basically the one thing that Sari has genuinely been making an effort to keep completely under wraps. And I am just disgusted. I am so irritated with him. Like, why? I thought you were smarter than this, dude. I really did. And I'm just like disgusted. All right. So I'm ahead of myself. She's still in the carriage with Rothan, and they're talking about the fact that she's able to go visit Dorian now. And this is something that she would have had to ask permission for a couple of months ago, but a lot of things have changed. And she says they could change back just as quickly. It would take only one unfortunate incident, and I'd be keeping Lilia company. Rothan tries to say, well, she did deliberately try to learn black magic. And Sania's like, yeah, she did. But she was also high on Roet, and I kind of wonder if she would have made the same choice if her brain hadn't been fucked with. I think that might have made her more susceptible to this whole thing. Also, Lord Leiden should have turned that book in. This shouldn't even have been something that was lying around the place. If he hadn't have turned up dead, he'd have been in pretty big trouble for having this book in the first place. And he asks whether or not she thinks they should start searching people's private libraries for stuff like this to ensure it doesn't happen again. And she's like, well, if they have them, they know they have them, and they're just going to hide them. So there's really no point. And she says, either someone else has learned black magic, or it was Callan, and the people who claim they saw him that night were lying. Oh, I didn't know this had even been a consideration. It didn't even enter my head that she would suspect Callan. Not to say that that doesn't make sense, because it does, but it is one of those moments of me just being like, oh, I guess that you would, wouldn't you? And it turns out there's plenty of witnesses that he was there, so nobody is like, because she says something like, I really expected them to read our minds to make sure it wasn't either of us. But both of them, there are so many witnesses to them being in other places at the time that it's considered a moot point. So they go inside. She has the usual kind of like cool reception from Dorian's wife. And they sit down to dinner. Her daughters are sort of weirded out about living here. Let's see. It's not, wait, is Alina his daughter or wife? Alina's the wife, isn't she? Okay. So Alina is weirded out living here because they have servants and she's not used to that. She likes to cook herself, and she feels like there's just a lot of sort of pomp to being here and having all of this extra space that she's not super used to. And the whole thing is, it's a weird moment where Rothan's about to make a joke about how they have a dining room now. And Dorian looks at him and kind of does the like slash across the throat, like, hey, shh, nope, don't say it sort of thing. And it's weird that she is so sensitive about it that they can't even make a joke. It's sort of odd. I feel like between that and the way that she looks at Sania, maybe that it's just like feeling self-conscious that makes her sort of react this way. But they begin talking about the situation, and Sania finds out that he said who Sarah's daughter is. And she says something about, I know my friend is very worried about her. And Alina says, if it's dangerous for her, is it dangerous for us? And the thing is that obviously Alina and her daughters are not in even remotely the same situation that Sari's daughter is in. You know, like, they're not out there in these streets trying to trick people or, you know, get beat up to pretend to not be on his side. They're not doing any of this. But Alina is genuinely freaking out. And Sania has to kind of keep herself from like snickering a little bit, because this woman is getting herself kind of worked up in this moment over nothing. Like, nobody is going to be interested in these people, she's certain. But she has to take it seriously because the woman obviously is genuinely upset. And she tells her, you know, you have these living arrangements with other magicians really close by, which means that there will be people around all the time and makes it unlikely for them to come and try and hit you here. And also, the people who are living here are magicians, and that makes it like, you know, that's a whole other level of protection. And he says, but you should come up with rules, who to let into your rooms and who not, how to be safe when you're out in the city, what to do if you think someone is following you or trying to get into the house. I'm sure you can work it out between you. And I like this. She manages to sort of do two things here, which is give her a project, you know, be like, come up with plans, figure out things, like talk it over with people. And she also manages to make it an issue that Dorian and Alina have to deal with themselves, and refocuses the energy of the conversation onto them as a couple working together and sort of pulling herself out of it. And I think that was really smart. Yalara asks, what happens if you don't catch Skellen? And they get interrupted, but she starts to say something about how he wants to gain control of. And I am assuming she was about to talk about like the Roet and the underworld. And they get interrupted because Lady Naki has disappeared. And like, we'll get to that. But Naki is just such a ballsy bitch. Honestly, the sheer audacity of this bitch. Ugh. When he said that, I was like, oh, okay. She's just doing that already, huh? So let's go back to Achadi, Daniel, and Tyent. So they have come into port in Arvis, and they are going to spend the night on shore and then apparently continue on, I believe. So the person that they are going to stay with turns out to be Achadi's cousin. And he grows Raka. And it's an interesting conversation when they like discuss whether or not it is seen as like kind of a peasant drink or not. And Daniel has to be like, I mean, yeah, it's starting to grow more fashionable for more people, but it definitely was seen that way. And I'm trying to find, oh yeah, they mentioned Roet. And it says the Ashaki nodded. Slaves of one of the southern estates acquired some recently, though I do not know how. Perhaps an enterprising trader from Kyrelia brought it across the mountains. It had an alarming effect, causing slaves to rebel or refuse to work. Their owner has forbidden its use and the possession of it and recommended that others do the same. Really? That doesn't feel like what Roet does from what we've seen. The idea that it causes them to rebel, like it sort of makes you feel like nothing really matters. So maybe that ties in with being like, well, maybe I'll die if I rebel, but oh well. But it's just it doesn't feel like it fits with the profile of what I understand Rowett to be like. And Daniel has a bit of a moment where he's like, oh, word, it helps them rebel? Maybe I should bring some here so that y'all get fucking taken down by your slaves. And then he's like, that's not probably a super solid idea because there's no underlying plan there. Martin says, he went full country bumpkin. Oh, true about Dorian. I missed that. I took that rebel as in not doing work because lazy. Maybe that is what it meant. It's just basically like, oh, fuck it. All right, maybe that is all it meant. When I hear rebel, I think of that as like an active revolution type thing. But rebel does have a much simpler, like, I'm just not following your rules kind of thing, meaning. So, yeah, maybe that is what they meant. So he takes them on a little tour around the estate. And they get to go and see how Raka is grown. And this is when they run into the slave. I can't remember his name, but I will see it in a moment. Who I don't think Daniel had any idea had left Achadi's service. So he talks about the fermentation and roasting and packing. And the way that it's described, Raka sounds like coffee. I'm not entirely sure that that's like, it might also be similar to chocolate, because both of them are made from beans that have to be roasted and fermented before they can be processed. But coffee is just the one that I think of, because I believe Raka has been described as a bit of a stimulant. So, and yeah, this, Chikori, who is Achadi's cousin, when he sees Achadi's reaction to seeing Varn, he sort of is like, do you want to buy him back? And it looks like Achadi's thinking about it for a second. And then he says, I do regret selling him at times, but no. And this makes me wonder, like, did he sell him, or did Varn run away, or what happened here? It seems like when they're talking a little bit later, Varn is smiling and doesn't seem to be like, he seems shocked initially to see Achadi, but it doesn't seem like, he's worried about retribution or anything. And Daniel's wondering whether or not Achadi sold Varn because he started to see through Varn's like pretending to be so devoted to him, and that he realized it was an act, like because he's a slave and is forced into this position, and he just didn't want to deal with him anymore. But he doesn't have any evidence for that. He's just sort of wondering if that's what it is. So we get a lot of information about growing Raka here and the way this all works. They have these like shells, the pods, that are very leathery. And there's a moment in which Tyend is wondering, like, maybe we could make shoes out of this because they are sort of like leather. But that is sort of sidelined. And I wonder if that's going to come up later, the way that this substance, like the texture of it, if it's important. So let's see, where do we go next? Oh yeah, we go to Lorkin here, but I talked about that. So then let's go to Sania visiting Lilia, because she is trying to figure out where Naki could have gone. And there's an interesting moment in which one of the servants says that Naki's been getting these letters and that she burned them with magic immediately after reading them. But they have to point out that her power was blocked. That can't have happened. And the servant says something like, she had seen Naki throw a letter into the fire recently, but thought it was out of anger. It didn't occur to her that it was because Naki couldn't use magic anymore. And I wonder if Naki has managed to bypass the block in the way that Lilia figures out, or if it was just an unobservant servant, you know? So she comes inside and talks to Lilia, asking her, does she know any places she could have gone? Does she know anything about these letters? And she makes a good observation here about how the whole thing is supposed to be that she trusted Lilia, Naki did, so much that she was willing to try out like using black magic with her. And yet Naki doesn't seem to have trusted her enough to divulge what was going on with these letters, which seemed apparently pretty important to her because other people noticed. And isn't that kind of weird that she would simultaneously be like, oh, only you, I only trust you, and then keep this like enormous secret? And it says Naki was receiving letters that upset her. She was receiving them for some time before Lord Leden's death until the day she was last seen at home. Do you know anything about these letters? And I really wonder if this is something like, does Naki have anything to do with the traitors? I don't know enough about her history to have any idea there. I feel like there might be a tie-in to everything, but I also feel like we would have gotten more hints about that if that were true. I don't know. So eventually Sonia leaves and Larandra is just sitting there wondering what the hell Naki's doing, you know, why she's running. And she sits down and Larandra begins talking to her. And first of all, Larandra is like, well, were you lying to them? Do you know where she is? And she has to be like, no, I wasn't lying. I genuinely have no idea. And Larandra says, I have a lot of connections that probably would lead to finding her. And it's too bad that we're stuck in here because I think that I would be able to help you out. And she says, Lilia says, what if she isn't dead? What if she's being held captive? What if she's being blackmailed? What if someone is trying to force her into telling them the instructions in the book on black magic? And Larandra says, I guess you won't know until the guild finds out and bothers to tell you. Do you think they will? It sounded like Sonia had her doubts. And so Larandra is already putting this like idea into Lilia's head that who knows what's happening, but the guild doesn't seem to care that much. And even if they found out, there's no guarantee they would share that information with you either, because they don't care about you also, you know? And then this moment with Lilia. It's nice to know you would help if you were able to. How strange that this woman who the guild regards as a criminal understands better than anyone else what I'm going through. Well, it's said that loyalty is important to thieves and people in the underworld. Lilia. Sweetie, she doesn't see the setup. So then, of course, Larandra's like, so do they block your powers before they put you in here? And she's like, that's a weird change in subject. I'm like, it's really not. Oh, honey, come on. And Larandra asks her, have you ever tried to get past the block? And Lilia says, no. I mean, Sonia put it there. She's strong. I really don't think I'm going to be able to just step around a block that she has made. Also, I just don't think it's possible. And Larandra says it has to be like possible. It seems to me that black magicians are not just stronger than normal magicians, but have a different kind of magic, a different way of controlling it. And their powers must be different, and they must be able to do things other magicians can't, like read minds. They can get around someone's defenses, unlike ordinary magicians. Now, I had forgotten about this aspect of things, that by using black magic, you are able to like bypass, like, but they are able, regular magicians can do this too forcibly though, can't they? Because Lilia says yes in response to this, but I didn't think black magicians were the only ones who could do that. Am I wrong? So Larandra says, it seems to me that being able to do different things with your mind ought to mean any block in that mind would have to be different too. Did Sania put the usual kind of block in your mind? I'm just thinking aloud. If you can answer, has anyone put a block on a black magician before? I think you should try and get past it. If no one's put one on a black magician before, and black magic gets around normal restrictions, then how do they know they got it right? Which is a very interesting question. Martin says, I don't think it's ever actually said. Huh, okay. Because, yeah, I don't, like, I thought that they could just, you know, that it was just a matter of, like, as Lorkin puts it a little bit later, being polite to not bust down doors and force your way into parts of people's minds, but that they could if they had to. So Lilia, if she found out, let's see, if Sania found out that it was gone, she would replace the block. But if I never used magic when anyone was here, nobody would ever know. And it says, let's see, Martin says, personally, I took it as black magic is forcibly taking magic and storing it. Everything else about black magic, like mind reading, can be done by normal magic, but it is said that it can't stop every magician doing it. Okay. Interesting. So basically what happens here is that Lilia is being led down the fucking primrose path. And she keeps being like, but if I find Naki, maybe it'll all be worth it. Maybe this will all work out and I'll be able to help her and everything will be great. And Lilia asks Larandra what it is that she wants. First of all, how long do you think it would take you to find her? And Larandra's like, I mean, I have no idea. They may already know, or they may not, and we have to put some elbow grease into figuring it out. If we slipped away each night and returned by morning, the guards might not even notice if we were gone. And Larandra's like, possibly. It depends on whether we can get in and out without anyone noticing. If I had access to my powers, I could levitate. And Lilia says, I can do that. She did not want to be talked into unblocking Larandra's powers. It was bad enough letting the woman loose, but releasing her on the city in full control of her powers was another matter entirely. Thank fuck for that. You know, I mean, Jesus, that's the one, like, the one bit of sense that she is displaying throughout this entire thing. So she asks for a promise that Larandra will help her find Naki and a promise that they will slip out and back without people noticing. And she focuses her mind and attempts to undo the block. And it hurts really bad, like a terrible headache. Rocking in the chair, she concentrated on her breathing and waited as the pain slowly faded away. Closing her eyes, she considered the block. A powerful reluctance came over her to extend her senses anywhere near it again. I love Naki. I have to help her. I have to find a way through this. She pondered the block. She thought about what Larandra had said about black magic being a different sort of magic. She remembered the instructions in the book. In early training, an apprentice is taught to imagine his magic as a vessel, perhaps a box or a bottle. As he learns more, he comes to understand what his senses tell him, that his body is the vessel, that the natural barrier of magic at the skin contains his power within. So she seeks that awareness. It came back to her instantly, and she felt a rush of excitement. She sought the block. It was still there, but now it was irrelevant. The block protected the place she had been taught to reach for magic, but her whole body was full of magic. She could tap into it from anywhere. She opened her eyes, she reached for magic and felt it respond. She channeled it out and used it to lift Waylor's books from the table. A rush of triumph went through her. So Larandra, she tells her that she did it. Larandra's like, good for you. Now shut the fuck up. Somebody is coming. And the guard comes and brings her dinner. And it ends with, I'm doing it for Naki. It doesn't matter what happens to me so long as she's safe. And I'm just like, oh, I hate it. Martin says, I think Lilia is being set up again. Larandra has her powers back already and is getting Lilia to do all the magic so she can claim it was all Lilia's idea if they get caught. That's an interesting thought. I don't know, because Larandra seemed really surprised that they were able to forcibly read her mind. So I kind of think that she isn't aware, that if she were able to unblock her powers, it would have, I don't know, maybe. I just don't see her needing Lilia to take the fall for it too much, because I imagine if she's trying to get out, she's just trying to get out. And whoever takes the fall, it doesn't matter, because she's going to be the fuck gone. But so I think she probably really does need her. And because the black magic thing does seem to fall outside of her purview of understanding of magic. But I guess we'll see. So I'm going to wrap up. But thank you again, Ashley, for commissioning this. Sorry that you couldn't join me, but I hope that you're enjoying the coverage anyway. Thank you, Martin, for hanging out in the chat with me. And I'll be seeing y'all again soon with a new episode. Until then, toodaloo, motherfuckers.
That was an Unspoiled Network podcast.